In a world where magic became real, countless demonic caves began to appear everywhere, bringing with them monstrous creatures known as demons. However, it wasn't just monsters that emerged. Magic also awakened humans with special powers. These individuals became known as Awaken, and over time, they came to play key roles in combating magical threats. Among all the dangers of that world, there was one enemy who stood out, the SSS-class Demon King, a feared being called Belphegor, known for mastering all 5 elements. To confront him, the most powerful squad of Awakened on the planet was summoned, a legendary group known as the Divine Corps. This squad had been led for the past 10 years by a man named Bai Yi, a warrior of immense skill and reputation. When Belphegor deployed his subordinates to protect his position, the mission of the Divine Corps began. The order came directly from the highest authority, one referred to only as God, and it was to completely clear out the Juth Demonic Cave, the most dangerous dungeon the group had ever faced. All members of the squad were present, including Ling Yue, a swift and lethal assassin who seemed to be enjoying the mission. Like the others, she was also an L-class Awakened, the highest classification in existence. This was a purge operation, designed exclusively for L-class individuals, which represented the maximum combat difficulty. The mage Han Xiaoling, another member of the team, used his spells alongside his companions. Meanwhile, the support member Lucian activated his gravitational pull ability, increasing the speed and power of his allies. With this reinforcement, Bai Yi charged furiously at the Demon King, managing to defeat him with his devastating strikes. Victory seemed absolute. Han Xiaoling, younger and full of energy, thought everything had ended too quickly. Ling Yue was already looking for new caves to explore, while Lucian reflected on everyone's effort, even suspecting that the mission had been too easy for Bai Yi. The intelligence report had been clear. Belphegor was a special demon king, wielding 5 elements and even a hidden ability, making the mission suspiciously simple for the threat level expected. In this relaxed atmosphere, Ling Yue hugged the captain and asked him to invite her to a banquet, even talking about taking a vacation together. But Bai Yi, uncomfortable, awkwardly dodged the situation, only promising to meet her later at their usual place in the holy capital. He didn't handle those situations well, and she, amused, told him he had failed once again, calling him a beta, while a younger member of the group commented that the captain clearly knew nothing about women. Then Bai Yi realized someone was missing. The man responsible for the final cleanup of the operation hadn't joined them yet. He was a member known for his slowness, nicknamed by his comrades as the champion of laziness, always the last to arrive. However, everything changed in an instant. A masked man appeared unexpectedly and initiated the true purge operation, killing Han Xiaoling with a direct shot to the head. Everyone was shocked. The masked man, who was in fact the cleanup agent, revealed that this was the real mission given by God, and that he was simply following higher orders. Bai Yi panicked and tried to react, only to discover his body was completely paralyzed. The masked man had tampered with the captain's food, causing the paralysis. Next, a divine ability was invoked, a plant-type technique called Forbidden Vines, which nullified any defense and rendered the targets unconscious. It had all been prepared in advance, an absolute strategy to eliminate the strongest member of the group. The captain couldn't understand what had happened, nor the reason behind the betrayal. The masked man declared that it was all a decree from God, a true purge operation against the L class. With coldness, he began to slowly crush Ling Yu and Lucian, making them bleed in front of the captain's eyes, who watched helplessly, overwhelmed by deep shock. Bai Yi wanted to understand why they were being eliminated. The Divine Corps had never broken any rule, never crossed any line. He wanted to know what kind of god would feel entitled to kill them. The masked man, now speaking more personally, called him an old friend, saying that God doesn't need a reason to kill, and then drove his own hand through Bai Yi's body, just like a character from Mortal Kombat. The squad leader couldn't believe that even after 10 years together, they had never truly been comrades. He had believed they were a family, but the masked man clarified that it had all been part of a plan from the very beginning. He had been chosen by God from the group's very first encounter, and had played that role for all those years only to gain the captain's trust. In the end, everyone in the Divine Corps had been nothing more than pawns, disposable pieces on someone else's grand chessboard. Despite all of it having been carefully orchestrated, the masked man was also frustrated. Pretending for so long had been a burden even for him, and so without hesitation he executed Bai Yi. On May 22, 2125, all members of the squad were officially confirmed dead. The L-class elimination operation had been successfully completed. Now the janitor behind it all was preparing to take his well-deserved vacation. However, something strange happened. Even after being shot in the head, Bai Yi could still slightly move his fingers. He heard a voice echoing through the darkness, a voice speaking about making a deal. The scene shifted to a completely different place, where the protagonist protagonist was chained, unable to understand where he was. Then, in front of him, appeared a grayish figure surrounded by an unusual aura, mocking his awkwardness with women, saying that if he couldn't deal with female attitudes, he would now have to face something far more complicated. The figure revealed itself to be none other than the real Belphegor, the very demon king who was supposedly defeated. The 5 elements that made up his power floated around his body, showing that he was far from being eliminated. Bai Yi immediately recognized his mortal enemy. It was obvious. A SSS-class demon king wouldn't die so easily. This was the Soul Domain, a spiritual plane connected to the realm of Naya, where Belphegor's true life force resided. The demon could feel the burning hatred in the human's heart, the same hatred he himself had once felt. For that reason, he made an offer. He would give Bai Yi the chance to go back in time and undo everything that had happened. His hidden ability was called Regression to Life, and with it, he could send Bai Yi to a distant point in the past, giving him a new opportunity to change fate. Bai Yi immediately thought of his comrades, the good moments they had shared over the past 10 years, and how they all died without explanation or justice. His thirst for vengeance was so intense that the chains binding him shattered in a surge of fury. He didn't just want to kill the traitorous janitor, he wanted to wipe out everyone who dared call themselves gods. Belphegor, observing that rage, understood that the answer had been given. He then offered the protagonist a gift, calling it a welcome present. Still wary, Bai Yi wanted to know the true price of such a deal, but the Demon King merely smiled in silence, revealing nothing. Then everything faded to black. The protagonist suddenly woke up in his old classroom. It was the state's sacred Academy of Protection, more specifically in the Elementary Division for Awakened Education. A teacher scolded him for sleeping in the middle of class. It was Professor Huang, a strict woman respected by all, clearly irritated with his behavior. Bai Yi was in shock to realize he had actually returned to the past. Not only that, but he was there before his awakening, still in elementary school. He could hardly believe the effectiveness of Belphegor's ability. Looking around, he saw faces he hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. This was real. The class continued as usual. Professor Huang explained the 5 main elements of that world: lightning, plant, cloud, nuclear, and stellar. Each person could possess only one of these elements, and depending on how the element connected to their body, individuals were classified into 3 roles: combat, support, and special. These roles, combined with the 5 elements, gave rise to countless awakened professions. The strongest student guild in the school, for example, was composed of a stellar mage, a cloud warrior, a nuclear bard, and a lightning assassin. Every student in that classroom had already surpassed the level of an ordinary human by awakening their potential, making that day the most important of their lives. Awakened professions were ranked from weakest to strongest in 4 tiers: dust, ember, abyss, and celestial. Each person had only one chance to awaken, and the profession they received determined their future in that world. After class, Bai Yi walked through the school's corridors and outdoor areas. Everything felt nostalgic, as if he were reliving a distant dream. He observed every corner, remembering where he had awakened for the first time. That's when he saw a boy being shoved violently to the ground. He recognized him immediately. It was Four Eyes, a classmate who was often the target of mockery. 3 students had surrounded him and thrown him down, calling him trash because of his artificial awakening, saying he didn't deserve to be at that school. The leader of the trio stomped on his foot angrily, revealing his fragile ego. His name was Hong Chang-sheng, a Class E student who had already awakened as a stellar assassin. His aggression stemmed from insecurity. Despite having a rare red tier awakening, he still felt inferior and needed to humiliate others to assert himself. The protagonist immediately recognized Hong Chang-sheng, well known as the school's bully. It was common to see him harassing classmates and intimidating the weak. Four Eyes, a quiet student, used to timidly offer tea sachets to him in an attempt to protect himself, but Chang-sheng was always looking to start a fight with anyone. At that moment, Professor Huang arrived to break up the chaos, firmly stating that this was a school, not the streets. Chang-sheng, with his manipulative demeanor, blatantly lied to the professor, saying Four Eyes had slipped on his own and that it had all been an accident. He showed the tea sachets, pretending he was just trying to gift his friends. Then, he leaned toward the professor and whispered something offensive, hinting that if she weren't so attractive, he would have already found a way to get her fired. He acted like he owned the world. Professor Huang, however, completely ignored the threats. She went to help Four Eyes, showing her integrity and empathy. The trio of bullies decided to leave, but before they could, Bai Yi stood in front of Chang-sheng, staring him down without flinching. Chang-sheng, with his arrogant posture, tapped Bai Yi's shoulder, asking what he was doing there. He shoved him aside and walked off, saying he'd be back later to laugh at the losers. Four Eyes, though injured, still apologized to the professor, who clearly knew he wasn't at fault. Bai Yi remembered how much that professor had helped him in his previous life. Despite her strict appearance, she was a kind and and dedicated woman. It was obvious she cared deeply for her students. Soon after, it was their class's turn to enter the awakening chamber, and before that, she reminded everyone to stay calm during the process to avoid injury. In that world, there were two ways to awaken. One was like Hong Cheng Sheng's, a natural awakening that occurred in people with exceptional physical constitution and innate talent, usually triggered during intense emotional moments. The other method was artificial, done through the awakening chamber, a technology developed by top scientists. Inside it, emotions and adrenaline were intensely stimulated to force the awakening of one's dormant potential. But since each person could only awaken once, it was considered the biggest opportunity of their lives, their one and only reset button. Finally, it was Bai Yi's turn. Professor Huang asked him to concentrate and not be lazy like during the last class when he had been caught sleeping. But unlike the others, he already knew what was coming. In his previous life, he had awakened as a nuclear warrior of Class E, a profession considered dust tier, the lowest rank. Because of that, he spent years being mocked and humiliated. Only much later, when he reached Class S, did he finally earn recognition. Since he possessed the nuclear element, he expected that to repeat, but he wasn't sure what profession he would receive this time. However, something unexpected happened. The awakening system malfunctioned. It detected that Bai Yi had 5 different elements in his body. He couldn't understand what was going on. He felt an intense heat inside him, and then a message appeared. The infinite awakening system had been activated. Because he possessed 5 elemental types, he could choose any initial class among the available elements. And in the future, when one of them accumulated enough energy, he would have the option to gain a new random class from that element, or even evolve his original class. Bai Yi could barely believe what he was seeing. He didn't need to choose just one path. He could accumulate elements and unlock other classes over time. It was a rare ability, far beyond any other student. It was even better than Julius, Chris's father, who bragged about having 2 jobs. He could obtain green, blue, red, gold, and even special quality professions, something no one there could even dream of achieving. But the system was clear. Only the first profession could be chosen. The others would be randomly granted based on the elements he accumulated. That's when he remembered the proposal made by Belphegor, and he finally understood the gift he had received, infinite awakening. Before making his choice, the system warned that all element bars would be reset after the decision, so he had to think carefully. Outside, the teachers and students were starting to grow impatient. At last, Bai Yi exited the chamber. Professor Huang, excited, rushed over to find out which profession he had awakened. But with a tired expression, he apologized and said he was going to disappoint her. He reported that he had awakened as a core-type warrior, with green quality, the weakest of all. Though visibly disappointed, the professor tried to encourage him. She said many green-quality professions had produced great talents, and that he shouldn't give up. She believed he would succeed in the future, but Bai Yi didn't want that kind of comfort. He could tell she was trying to help him, and even though she tried to keep a composed posture, she couldn't hide that she was trying to console him. She simply asked him to rest for a while. Meanwhile, Hong Changsheng, from a distance, watched the scene with contempt. He thought it was pathetic to see the teacher trying to console someone like Bai Yi, calling her useless for doing so. For him, reality was harsh and simple. Those with green quality professions were at the bottom of the barrel. According to Changsheng, God had his favorites, and those favorites were always born strong, while the weak existed only to be humiliated. Bai Yi had become completely atheist. Just hearing the name of God already made him angry. At the same time, Professor Huang once again tried to contain Changsheng's arrogance, but he continued with his cruel declarations. He said people with green quality professions were like beggars in that society. According to him, those without power or experience were doomed to live on the margins, forgotten by justice. In his view, the strong would always obtain more resources and grow even stronger, while the weak would never escape the depths. For Changsheng, the fate of green-class individuals was sealed the moment they awakened, and any positive word the professor offered Bai Yi was just a waste of time. In Changsheng's mind, people were born with limitations. The awakening school was merely a miniature reflection of that unfair reality. He considered Professor Huang, who had a blue-quality profession, to be a useless woman living off the government's low salary. As he spoke, holding a drink in his hand, he prepared to humiliate the protagonist even more. However, Bai Yi took the cup from his hand and threw the drink right into Changsheng's face, who became furious. Bai Yi had done it simply because he couldn't stand hearing the oppressor's words any longer, which only enraged Changsheng further. Enraged, Changsheng prepared a direct strike to hit the protagonist's face. It was a basic attack called Star-Piercing Strike, a standard technique from the Galaxy Assassin class. However, Bai Yi wasn't going to take a free hit. He quickly reacted and used his strength to block the attack. This completely shocked Changsheng. The protagonist, who had played a lot of Bloodborne, had learned to use perfect parry, executing a perfect counterattack. The impact was so strong it knocked Qiangsheng to the ground, making him bleed from the mouth. Even Bai Yi himself didn't fully understand what he had just done. The people around were in shock, wanting to know how he had pulled that off. The protagonist then explained that he had chosen his class of his own free will. He was an innate core-type warrior, and he was already familiar with that kind of movement. Even so, Qiangsheng insisted that it was just luck. He claimed the protagonist had simply had a lucky reflex, because to him, being of a rare red quality class, it was natural to consider himself superior. In Qiangsheng's view, Bai Yi was nothing more than trash. Professor Huang, observing the scene, was certain that it wasn't just luck. The protagonist had used a unique top-tier skill from the warrior class known as perfect parry. This technique involved blocking the strike precisely at the moment of maximum impact and returning the physical damage to the opponent within seconds, with speed beyond normal reaction limits. That was what they called perfect defense. Her former master had trained that technique for over 10 years and still hadn't fully mastered it. Seeing Bai Yi, who had just awakened and had no combat experience, master it so naturally was something she considered impossible. Humiliated, Qiangsheng was ready to kill the protagonist right then and there. He swore he would make Bai Yi crawl in front of everyone. To him, the protagonist had chosen a weak class, and to provoke him like that was unacceptable. However, judging someone's future and worth from birth was a grave mistake, something Qiangsheng would only realize years later. As the two radiated their presence, the other students began to whisper among themselves, many of them watching the entire clash unfold. The social backgrounds of the two were completely opposite. Hong Qiangsheng's father was a high-ranking official, and his uncle was the principal of the school. Bai Yi's family, on the other hand, was extremely poor and had no connections. The protagonist's friend, Four Eyes, was worried about how things were unfolding. He feared that Bai Yi might get expelled from the school. Trying to de-escalate the situation, Professor Huang intervened again. As always, she tried to see the bright side, believing that perhaps in the future, the two could fight together as companions. But Qiangsheng thought that was a joke. To him, the protagonist had provoked him in a brutal way. And even if Bai Yi were to kneel and beg for mercy now, it wouldn't make any difference. He wanted to show everyone that Bai Yi was just a loser. Professor Huang knew that the differences between the two went beyond their classes. They also lay in the attribute bonuses. A green quality class gave a 100% bonus, meaning no increase at all. A blue quality class received a 150% bonus, and a red quality class 200%. That meant someone with a red quality class had double the attributes of someone with a green quality class. In the professor's mind, there was no way the protagonist could win in a direct confrontation. Four Eyes, for his part, didn't understand why Bai Yi kept provoking someone so much stronger. Even though he found Qiangsheng detestable, he believed the only way to survive in that society was to avoid direct conflict. To him, when avoiding a dangerous person isn't an option, the best thing to do is to swallow the humiliation. Only then can one survive. Directly confronting someone stronger was, in his opinion, a foolish choice. And in his view, what awaited the protagonist was even greater humiliation. Qiangsheng then prepared to attack again. Professor Huang grew tense, realizing that Bai Yi was planning to block the attack again. But this time, the oppressor wouldn't let it happen. He wanted to see if the protagonist could dodge instead. But dodging was not the choice Bai Yi made. At the last moment, he activated a skill called Instant Flash, a technique that triggered a traversal effect, allowing him to phase through any obstacle in his path. When the attack passed straight through, Qiangsheng didn't understand what had just happened. Realizing that Bai Yi was behind him, Qiangsheng began coughing up blood. He fell to his knees, unable to believe he had lost to someone he considered a complete failure. The surrounding students watched in silence. Some couldn't believe what they had just seen and wondered if Qiangsheng had simply slipped. Four Eyes found the whole thing extremely entertaining, and even Professor Huang couldn't understand what had just occurred. Amid the confusion, a pink-haired girl observed intently. Her name was Qi Yin. She calmly analyzed every detail of the fight. She noticed that the moment Qiangsheng tried to attack, Bai Yi activated a special acceleration skill. She recognized it as the advanced form of the technique known as Instant Flash. Even so, Qi Yin still didn't understand how he had taken down his opponent with a single blow. She realized the protagonist not only mastered the basic warrior skills at their highest level, but also integrated them perfectly into real combat. As the class monitor, she was one of the few people there capable of making such an accurate analysis. As the whispers grew louder, Bai Yi walked away. The system showed he had received a small amount of experience. Since his body had accumulated elements, that experience was absorbed into the galaxy element. It was exactly as he had predicted. Using his class in real combat allowed him to accumulate class experience. In addition, defeating feed-type opponents also granted feed points. However, upon receiving only 50 experience points, the protagonist concluded that he would need to enter demonic dens if he wanted to level up faster. He had chosen the core-type warrior class because, upon class advancement, he would gain access to unique traits and extremely powerful abilities, capable of surpassing even other rare classes. But for that, he needed to level up as quickly as possible. As he was about to leave, Chiang Sheng, still consumed by rage, tried to strike him from behind with his sword. However, at that exact moment, the school principal appeared. His name was Hong Liang, Chiang Sheng's uncle, and he immediately ordered his nephew to stop. He looked disappointed by his nephew's behavior, believing the boy should already be ashamed enough after what had happened. The principal then addressed all the students. He said they had awakened their professions that day and must be exhausted. Since it was the weekend, he told them to go home and inform their families about their respective classes. Upon hearing the word family, Bai Yi froze. When he was reincarnated, he hadn't realized it right away, but now he understood. His family was still alive. That same day, May 22nd, 2015, something terrible was about to happen, and he couldn't believe he had forgotten the most important thing. Eyes wide, he started running, leaving the principal behind. Hong Liang, completely ignored, was furious. He turned to Professor Huang and told her she needed to manage her students better. He also said he would pretend nothing had happened that day. Professor Huang immediately bowed, apologizing to her superior. Meanwhile, Chiang Sheng was taken to his uncle's office. There, he insisted that he had only lost because of Bai Yi's luck. However, the principal considered that nonsense. He had seen exactly what happened. The moment Chiang Sheng attacked, Bai Yi used the instant flash technique. But what impressed the principal the most was the precision of the strike. The protagonist hit the weakest point in his nephew's body, completely breaking through his defense. And all of that was done using only basic warrior techniques. To Hong Liang, who had fought in real wars and bloodbaths for over 15 years, not even he could reproduce such techniques with that level of perfection. That fight was as one-sided as a professional player facing a child using basic moves. The principal made it clear, Bai Yi was not the ordinary student his nephew imagined. The scene shifted. Bai Yi was running through the streets, confused. He wasn't sure whether revenge was the only thing he had to do after reincarnating. When he got home, he remembered how, in his past life, everything was covered in blood on this very day. But now, he was determined to stop it from happening again, even if it meant dying in the process. Inside the house, his father was laughing loudly at the TV, while his mother, Ru Yun, was doing the dishes. When Bai Yi walked in, both of them were surprised to see him home so early. Just seeing his mother alive brought him to tears. It was an indescribable feeling. Ru Yun was deaf and communicated with him using sign language. She noticed his emotion but thought he was just hungry. She said she had made his favorite dish, a kind of noodles, and promised that she would prepare his favorite pickled fish the next day. But Bai Yi insisted on eating the fish that very day, and even offered to help her cook it. During the conversation, his father also got involved, even though no one had called him. He believed his wife could handle it alone, and didn't understand why his son had ignored him upon arriving. He knew that today was his son's awakening day, and was expecting good news. His name was Bai Lingsheng. He also had a warrior profession, electric type, quality C. He'd even come home early from work just to celebrate the moment with his family. The protagonist, however, chose to hide the truth. He said he hadn't managed to awaken. He claimed the process had been delayed and confusing, and that many people had failed to complete the ritual that day. Bai Lingsheng, suspicious, asked why his son had returned home so early. He mentioned that Da Lei's son had awakened a blue-quality profession, and even though he considered it inferior, it was still better than nothing. He hinted that his own son shouldn't end up like him, someone with a red-quality profession, who had worked hard, shed blood and sweat, all for Bai Yi's sake. That's why he wanted to know his son's real profession. Before Bai Yi could respond, he was caught off guard by his father. Bai Lingsheng smashed a glass bottle over his son's head violently. He already knew the boy had awakened a green-quality profession and couldn't accept it. In Lingsheng's eyes, his son had shamed the family name and pretended to be someone serious at school, while hiding the fact that he had a class he considered useless. The protagonist vividly remembered how his father had always been impulsive and violent, someone who couldn't control his emotions. Over time, he had almost forgotten what happened on Awakening Day in his past life. Back then, as soon as his father found out he had awakened a green profession, he broke a bottle over his head in shame. Ru Yun, his mother, had tried to protect him, as she always did, but weak and afraid, Bai Yi couldn't react. His father took out his rage on her, beating her for nearly an hour. That day, her leg was broken, and she suffered a serious head injury that left her mentally unstable from then on. Now, seeing the bottle shatter on his head again, that dark memory came back with full force. Lingsheng ordered his son to get up. Even though Bai Yi was just a green-quality E-rank warrior, his father had vast combat experience from his original class, a C-rank electric warrior. Unlike Chiang Sheng, his father was truly dangerous. Not even a newly awakened golden-class warrior could easily defeat him. Suddenly, Ling Sheng grabbed Bai Yi by the hair, saying he never should have let Ru Yun give birth to that boy. The protagonist already knew this tragedy was about to unfold. That's why he had tried to keep his mother away this time. He had asked her to go out, but unfortunately, Ru Yun appeared, carrying shopping bags, shocked to see her husband beating their son again. The boy couldn't understand how she had already returned. He had expected more time before she came back. Ling Sheng began insulting his wife, saying she had given birth to a piece of garbage. In his past life, Bai Yi had managed to level up early, even with a green-class profession, right after killing his own father. That happened because Ling Sheng beat his wife to death, and the protagonist avenged her with his own hands. At that moment, reliving the past, Bai Yi tried to fight back. However, Ling Sheng responded with a strike so powerful that it sent him crashing to the ground. Even though he had just awakened and was much stronger than a regular human, Bai Yi still couldn't withstand his father's strength, who struck him with terrifying ease. Even injured, Ru Yun tried to protect her son. Ling Sheng, in turn, revealed that he had been happy when he first learned he was going to have a child. He believed that it would be the chance to change the destiny of the Bai family, thinking that everyone would place their hopes for glory on the boy. But now he felt frustrated, as the boy had awakened a profession considered inferior. He blamed the mother's genes, saying they were weak, and then grabbed a chair to strike her. At that moment, Bai Yi activated Instant Flash and threw his father against the wall, declaring that he would not allow him to lay a hand on her ever again. That caught Ling Sheng's attention while Ru Yun watched in terror. The father even showed a degree of respect for being thrown like that, but quickly got back on his feet to attack again. The protagonist tried to block, hoping to use parry to buy time and execute a plan, but his father was far too fast. Within seconds, he broke through the boy's guard and landed a devastating blow. The difference in level between them was absurd. Ling Sheng mocked the attempted challenge, saying the boy was just too eager. He declared that he was going to kill him, unable to accept that someone with such a weak class had even dared to challenge him. Picking up another chair, he started yelling that his son was nothing, even after awakening. Just as he was about to strike again, someone knocked on the door, demanding that it be open. It was two men from the inspection team. One of them was Li Yang, the vice captain, and a red-class warrior. The other was Chen Jinwu, an investigator with a blue-class profession. They were searching for a criminal known as Snow who had been seen in that building. The agents were going door to door, asking the residents if they had seen anyone suspicious. They showed a sketch of Snow's face. Ling Sheng, who had been watching news reports about the criminal constantly, declared that even if he saw that man, he wouldn't report him. However, Liang noticed the condition of Ru Yun and Bai Yi and wanted to know what had happened. The father tried to play it off, saying he had sent his son out for groceries and he had tripped on the way back. Bai Yi, however, wasn't willing to cover up what had happened. He informed the agents, without hesitation, that he had been assaulted by his own father, surprising Ling Sheng. 18 minutes earlier, the protagonist had already called the police, reporting that he had seen someone resembling Snow entering a building in the ZUA residence complex. He had predicted that the patrol would respond quickly, but hadn't expected them to be this efficient. Now, with the agents at the door, Liang wanted to confirm if what the boy said was true. Meanwhile, Ling Sheng tried to escape the situation, pretending to be remorseful and claiming he never meant to hurt his son, but the protagonist began to recount everything in detail: the shattered bottle over his head, the strike to the arm with a bench, the kicks, the punches, and all the abuse he had endured. Bai Yi was ready. His words flowed with such firmness that he sounded like an experienced lawyer. He clearly explained to the two agents that his father was extremely violent and, according to the rules that governed the Awakened, any aggressor who posed a potential threat had to be detained immediately. That statement visibly shocked the two agents. Bai Ling Sheng, furious, shouted at his son. But Liang, upon hearing the account and assessing the situation, issued an arrest warrant for the boy's father. Before being taken away, Ling Sheng still tried to lunge at his son, but the agents restrained him in time and removed him from the house in handcuffs. Ru Yun, in a state of despair, rushed to her son and hugged him tightly. Although injured, the protagonist wanted her to understand that this time he had protected her. He hadn't let the worst happen, as it did in the past. He knew he had 15 days. He promised himself this would be the family's last time suffering. It was enough time to grow stronger. He wouldn't let that beating be in vain. With determination, he told his mother that he had taken the key to his father's secret vault. The only item that, in his past life, Ling Sheng valued so much he betrayed his own teammates for it. That same item was what had allowed Bai Yi, in his previous life, to climb from the lower part of Class E to reach his current Class C ranking. Wasting no time, Bai Yi went to his father's room. He knew the vault was hidden there, in a secret compartment that not even his mother knew about. In his previous life, he only discovered it after Ling Sheng's death. Upon opening the vault, he found a sword. It was a powerful weapon, one that could allow him to invade a demon lair even on his own. Demon lairs were places where the protagonist protagonist could level up his profession, but they were all under the jurisdiction of the divinity, which meant you had to be part of a guild-affiliated group to enter legally. However, there were exceptions. The only lairs accessible to Bai Yi at that moment were those managed by the school and a hidden demon lair he knew about from his previous life. The scene shifts to this lair, where the protagonist's plan was clear: surpass everyone else as fast as possible. Meanwhile, the narrative returns to the police station, where law enforcement was on high alert. The entire force had been mobilized, including the vice captain, but nothing was found, leading them to believe it was a false alarm. Even so, they knew they couldn't let their guard down. If Snow was truly in the area, it would be a serious threat. Meanwhile, behind bars, Bai Lingsheng begged to be released. He promised he would never do it again. He tried to bargain with Liang, mentioning that he had heard the vice captain's wife was about to give birth and that he had a friend who owned the best postpartum care center in Chuxi County. It was clear all he wanted was to rise in the ranks of the inspection team, but the agents weren't falling for it. He would be transferred to the Awakened prison the following day, and just thinking about his son made his rage grow even more. As the father was taken away, the protagonist followed his own path. He knew he needed to grow stronger, and the best way to do that was by exploring a demon lair. These places could appear anywhere in the world, functioning like dimensions parallel to reality. The gates appeared suddenly, and most were quickly taken over by guilds. These demon lairs were filled with demonic beasts and valuable resources. That's exactly why Bai Yi decided to go after that hidden lair that no one else knew about. The place was dangerous. By rule, you should only enter in a team with members of varying professions and elements to increase your survival chances. But the protagonist had no choice. In his previous life, this lair was only discovered 5 years later, when the demon race invaded the human world. So at that moment, he stood before a perfect opportunity. It was the lowest-ranking hidden demon lair possible, but also the only one accessible to him at his current stage. The lair's world was covered in ice. The floor, the walls, everything reflected a bluish, cold light. From this, Bai Yi concluded that the demonic beasts in that region were likely cloud element types. Carefully observing his surroundings, he noticed signs that someone had already passed through. Footprints, cuts in stones, bone fragments, until he came face to face with a gigantic bear covered in spikes, surrounded by various skeletons. The tension rose. Suddenly, a beast tried to attack him from behind. It was a wolf with a higher level than Bai Yi. Even at a disadvantage, he managed to react in time. He quickly dodged and blocked the enemy's strikes. The battle was intense, but the protagonist kept control. Taking advantage of an opening, he launched a precise blow, defeating the wolf with accuracy. The victory, though small, was significant. It showed that he was on the right path, and that even with disadvantages, it was possible to overcome the challenges ahead. The weapon hidden in Bai Yi's father's vault was an A-rank item, unavailable on the market. For now, it compensated for his lack of combat power. It was known as the Kunwu blade. The problem was that the beast's defense was very high, so even targeting vital points, it would take several hits to bring them down. Deep down, Bai Yi even missed the days when he was just an L-rank awakened. Doing quick calculations, he concluded that he'd need to kill at least 20 wolves to level up once. But then a howl echoed, and he soon realized that several wolves were approaching, drawn by the scent of their companion's blood. To make matters worse, the Wolf King was among them. Wasting no time, Bai Yi charged toward the enemies, striking vital points with critical blows and dodging attacks with agility. He repeated the same movements until, with one powerful strike, he eliminated all the normal wolves at once, gaining a good amount of experience. Only the Wolf King remained. After landing several precise cuts, he managed to defeat that creature too. With that, he wouldn't struggle to level up until reaching Class D. Shortly after, he finally reached level 2. Though exhausted after defeating 20 wolves, his E-rank body still endured. Bai Yi wished he had a dimensional backpack, otherwise he would have to abandon many valuable items. Most demon lairs were monopolized by large guilds, making progression extremely difficult for Awakened, who weren't part of an organized group. To gain access to higher-level lairs, Bai Yi knew he needed to join the Divinity Guild, whose academy selected talents for its teams. The dream of nearly every student was to graduate and be recruited by a guild like Divinity. Being expelled from a team meant stagnation. Bai Yi's own father had remained stuck at Class C after being expelled from his guild's group. Going solo was time-consuming, and with the temperature in that place being so low, he needed to move quickly, as he was burning too much energy. As he continued his journey, another pack of wolves appeared. He then cut down some trees, causing them to fall on the enemies. But suddenly, a massive creature appeared. The Cloud Serpent. Bai Yi was surrounded by beasts on all sides, as if they wanted to turn him into luncheon meat. It was at that moment that an explosion shook the region. The commotion awakened all nearby monsters, including the feared Icefield bear. The problem was that the bear had awakened in a berserk state, attacking anything in sight. It effortlessly destroyed wolves and serpents. Meanwhile, Bai Yi simply dodged the attacks and took the opportunity to collect the items dropped by the defeated creatures. While the bear attacked some beasts, Bai Yi focused on eliminating others. This way, he reached level 4 and earned 12 attribute points to distribute. Ironically, instead of being a threat, the bear was helping Bai Yi conserve energy. Still, he had to land the final blow for the experience to count. Even as he leveled up quickly, the wolves kept coming. Reaching his physical limit, Bai Yi drove his sword forcefully into the ground. The impact was so strong that it shattered part of the terrain, revealing that the lake present was actually a suspended ice bridge between two cliffs. Using this advantage, he killed several wolves at once and jumped to the other side. With the little stamina he had left, he dealt with the enemies that managed to cross the bridge, as that was his fastest way to keep leveling up. However, every demon lair hit a final boss. These creatures were always high level and brutally strong. Bai Yi found it strange that all the chaos he had caused hadn't awakened the boss yet. That's when an ice spell surged in his direction. He tried to dodge, but realized the real danger was only beginning. The lair's boss hadn't been sleeping. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike, biding his time until Bai Yi was exhausted. He tried to escape in every way possible, but ended up cornered at the edge of a cliff. His body began to freeze from the bottom up. Bai Yi couldn't believe that such a low-level cave was hiding such an intelligent enemy. The final boss was the Pale Forest Grandmaster, a level 11 creature ranked D. To make matters worse, he wasn't alone. He had two subordinates known as the demonic apes of the Pale Forest, ready to crush any hope of victory. Being completely frozen like that was extremely dangerous. Bai Yi's body began losing all its heat, and he knew he couldn't remain in that state for long. The Pale Forest Grandmaster ordered his subordinates to attack the boy immediately. Even with his body partially trapped in ice, Bai Yi couldn't let that happen. As the attack closed in, he used his block skill, causing one of the subordinates to bleed. To break free, he activated the Shatter skill, which allowed an awakened one to consume all remaining energy to instantly escape a control state. Though it worked, the skill drained almost all his stamina. He knew it would take time for the Grandmaster to cast another spell of that level, so he had to end things quickly. The boss then gave a new command. He ordered the Icefield Bear to attack the protagonist. The situation was critical. The natural ice element was heavily countered by the cloud element, which further weakened Bai Yi's resistance. Facing two demonic apes was already dangerous enough, but now he also had to deal with a giant bear and a pack of wolves. While trying to defend himself, one of the apes attacked. Bai Yi blocked the blow, but the second one struck at the same time, making defense nearly impossible. He couldn't gather strength. The beast didn't let him catch his breath, and with the Icefield Bear charging violently, the only option was to retreat. Bai Yi's stamina was at its limit. The Grandmaster noticed this, and once again cast his skill called Ice Storm. Bai Yi was shocked by how short the cooldown was for such a powerful spell. However, in his past life, he had already faced extreme situations and developed a sharp sense for spotting opportunities. Now he saw only two options. The first was to keep fighting until his stamina hit 0, which meant certain death. The second was to jump off the cliff, and that's exactly what he did. Still partially frozen, Bai Yi hurled himself off the ice bridge. The scene then shifts to his home. Ru Yun, his mother, believed he was still asleep. It was 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and she found it strange not to see him in bed. There was only a note in which he said he had gone to a friend's house and wouldn't be back late. He asked her not to worry. Still, Ru Yun felt suspicious. If he had truly gone to visit a friend, he would have told her beforehand. He wouldn't have just left a note. She felt something was wrong. Since the previous day, he had seemed different. There was something odd in his behavior, and it left her deeply uneasy. The scene returns to the demon lair right at the moment when the ice bridge collapses. Nearly 100 demonic beasts fall along with the debris. Bai Yi tries to hold on to one of the beams while coughing, exhausted. He remembers his past life. He also recalls that at the bottom of the cliff, there was a river. That was his second escape route, and probably his only real chance at survival. But the impact of the fall and the continuous use of Shatter had consumed nearly all of his stamina. He believed he had reached his absolute limit. Then, a massive creature appeared, ready to strike. Bai Yi, in that moment, fondly remembered each of his former squad mates, especially his mother. But when he thought of his father, who wanted him dead, and the caretaker who betrayed them, he made a decision. Right there, he decided he would no longer accept limits. He couldn't have limits. He wouldn't allow the mistakes of his past life to repeat. With his fists, he tried to defend himself from the creature. He had already lost once. He had already died once, and he would not die again. With all the strength he had left, Bai Yi landed a kick on that massive beast and then grabbed the sword that had been his father's secret treasure. Only desperate situations could force a profession breakthrough. Going alone into a demon lair, attracting hordes of beasts, and then jumping off a cliff had been enough to push him to this point. He hadn't done it out of carelessness, but because he wanted to feel that adrenaline again. Still, even that hadn't been enough to force a profession advancement. However, unexpectedly, Bai Yi awakened the core element, Sacred Swordsman. Now he was determined. He would clear that entire lair. After all, an advanced skill could completely elevate his level. The creature came at him again. At the same time, the Icefield Bear approached from behind. Bai Yi then activated the technique known as Realm of Purity, and with it, he was able to deal with multiple creatures at once. Thanks to the Realm of Purity, his fatigue disappeared and his stamina was fully restored. Now, more determined than ever, he was ready to return and face the final boss. He had already reached level 9, making it much easier to defeat beasts. The cold was barely noticeable. The Realm of Purity had the ability to absorb all accumulated fatigue and damage, releasing that energy in a single burst against a group of enemies. However, it could only be activated after enough exhaustion and powerful strikes had been stored. Bai Yi climbed slowly until he reached the top, worried about his mother. The scene then shifted to the final boss of the demon lair, who was still meditating inside his hut. The next instant, the hut's roof was completely destroyed. The narrative then returned to Bai Yi's home. It was already late at night, around 11 o'clock. Ru Yun, his mother, was distraught. She had prepared his favorite meal and just wanted to know he was safe. Meanwhile, inside the hut, the Icefield Bear now lay defeated. Bai Yi had taken down the beast and once again stood before the Pale Forest Grandmaster. The boss reacted quickly, ordering his demonic apes to attack. However, Bai Yi was stronger than ever. With just his blocks, he could easily take them down. The final boss tried to use his Ice Storm skill, but the protagonist was immune, thanks to the Cloud Element resistance effect that had been activated. Realizing the critical situation, the boss gathered several apes for a combined assault. But Bai Yi had no intention of being defeated. He knew this was his chance to reach Class D. Without hesitation, he ripped off the boss's arm, making the creature's purple blood splatter everywhere. Then, he finished the enemy with multiple precise slashes, slicing the body as if preparing monkey soup. In doing so, he successfully advanced to Class D. Because he had accumulated enough Cloud Element energy, Bai Yi also had the opportunity to awaken a new profession. After so much fighting, he had almost forgotten that this was even possible. In the end, he obtained the profession Cloud Element Mage, a red E-rank profession, but with power comparable to his current status as a D-rank warrior. In addition, he obtained a few items, and most importantly, the long-desired magic pouch, capable of storing up to 20 items. There were still some apes alive nearby, so Bai Yi decided to test it out, using his new magical profession. The scene then shifted back to his mother's house. Ru Yun was sitting on the couch, worried, at 5 o'clock on Sunday morning. She no longer knew what to do until Bai Yi finally walked in through the door. Upon seeing him, Ru Yun stood up, relieved, and hugged him tightly. The boy apologized for making her wait, but couldn't ignore the fact that she had stayed up all night for him and hadn't even eaten. He then convinced her that it was time to leave the past behind and stay away from Bai Lingsheng for good. With the magic pouch and the essential weapons he had acquired, he brought back more than 10 of the most valuable items he had obtained in the lair. The next scene showed Bai Yi negotiating with a broker. He wanted to sell just 1 diamond for 8,000, which made the merchant suspicious, thinking the boy might be trying to scam him. He never thought anyone could be so greedy. After some persistence, the price was settled at 7,000. In his past life, Bai Yi had dealt with many magical ore brokers, so he knew how to negotiate well. With that money, he managed to rent a comfortable house for his mother. In his previous life, she never had a single day of peace, and now, with this new chance, he wanted her to truly smile. The scene showed Ru Yun smiling while preparing dinner in the new house. It had been a long time since Bai Yi had seen his mother smile like that. With housing taken care of, having reached D rank, and awakening a new profession, Bai Yi still didn't feel like he could relax. His father was still in prison, but the situation wasn't completely resolved. He knew he could only take revenge peacefully once that matter was fully settled. So he started working on a new weapon, creating a bracelet that held a magic stone capable of storing elemental power. The narrative then shifted to Chang Sheng, who appeared exiting a portal with his subordinates. They were exhausted, and a girl tried to convince him to take a break, offering him some water. He was rude, however, swatting her hand away and refusing any rest. Chiang Sheng wanted to make the most of his time, and was already planning to head to the next demon lair for extra training. He didn't want anyone to grow stronger faster than him. In the upcoming simulated combat test, he intended to prove to everyone that he was a true genius. In another scene, a young woman looked at the list of new awakened individuals and noticed that there were no gold-ranked professions. This made her believe that there was nothing interesting to expect from that test. On Monday morning, Bai Yi woke up and was surprised to see a hearty meal on the table. He was late and didn't understand why his mother hadn't woken him. Ru Yun, seeing how deeply he slept, decided to let him rest. She just wanted him to have a proper breakfast without rushing. To her, being late once in a while wasn't a big deal. She was a good mother, and that was the first time they had shared a truly worthy breakfast together. During the meal, she brought up his birthday, asking what he would like as a gift. It was coming up that Friday, June 5th. Only then did Bai Yi realize the date. In his past life, after his mother's death, no one ever celebrated his birthday again, and he gradually forgot the date altogether. He didn't even know if there was anything he wanted. The only thing he truly wished for, he already had, his mother alive. Now all that mattered was completing his next objective, eliminating the caretaker who betrayed his former squad. The scene shifted to the awakened secondary school. An instructor was present to prepare the students for the simulated combat, a truly important event. The secondary school was part of the high school division directly under the Divine Guild, and the entire guild group would be watching each student's performance closely. The simulated combat was the first official stage after awakening and also functioned as a graduation evaluation. The test was broadcast live, and the student with the best performance would have the chance to participate in the cultivation trip with the high school division, an annual opportunity to get closer to the main guild. The school gathered the most promising students from middle and high school to visit the Sacred Realm, the Divine Guild's headquarters. That place was special to the protagonist. In his past life, he met his master in that realm, which was also the birthplace of the enemy he now sought revenge on. However, his master and the masked caretaker had never met back then. The masked one only joined the team after Bai Yi became part of the Divine Corps. To find that masked man, Bai Yi decided to get the highest score in the evaluation and secure his spot in the cultivation trip, the fastest route to reach him. Meanwhile, the other students were excited about the simulated combat, and the instructor began the official training. The first stage was physical training. Everyone was sent to the gravity room, where they had to complete 10 sets of transport runs. However, Bai Yi interrupted, telling the instructor he didn't want to use that room. The other students were confused. The instructor, knowing about the conflict between Bai Yi and Changsheng from the previous weekend, thought the boy was getting arrogant. To him, defeating a red-rank profession detector wasn't enough reason to skip steps. Even so, Bai Yi explained that he preferred training more tailored to his own style. The instructor was irritated, taking it as a direct criticism of his methods. He insisted that physical aptitude was essential for any awakened individual and that there was nothing wrong with training in the gravity room. The runs, according to him, were especially suitable for warriors and assassins who required speed and coordination. However, Bai Yi argued that mages and bards, for example, would benefit more from elemental rooms, where they could train their power control. Each profession had distinct attributes and habits, and therefore the ideal training should also be different. This answer made the instructor even more annoyed. In his eyes, Bai Yi was trying to teach him how to do his job. At that moment, Chi-Yin took note of what the protagonist had said and couldn't help but think of Dong Yang, since the idea of personalized training had been proposed by him in the past. If it weren't for the videotape her father brought, she would never have known that. Now, she was beginning to fear that Bai Yi and Dong Yang shared the same ideals. Meanwhile, the student known as Four Eyes became worried about Bai Yi. He feared the teacher might try something against him, so he discreetly offered a few pieces of advice to avoid further trouble. Surprisingly, the instructor changed his demeanor and smiled. He found the training methods suggested by Bai Yi interesting. However, he also explained that with so many students at the school, it would be difficult to meet everyone's individual needs in such a short time. The simulated combat was the final evaluation for all graduating students, and any mistake by the instructor could jeopardize their future. As a teacher, he explained, it was a dilemma to choose whether to guide them or let them choose their own paths. Bai Yi, who had faced many family hardships in his past life, remembered the good teachers who helped him grow. He assured the instructor that he wouldn't be disappointed in the graduation performance. With that, the teacher asked how exactly he wanted to train. Knowing that Bai Yi had awakened as a core-type warrior, he was shocked to hear that the boy wanted the elemental room set to maximum elemental nullification. This proposal surprised not only the instructor, but also the other students. The protagonist's justification was simple. He wanted his abilities to be more balanced and to challenge his own weaknesses. He didn't reveal that he had privileged information, nor that he also planned to train as a mage. Chi-Yin, in turn, became interested in following the same path as the protagonist. Since she was a mage, it made perfect sense for her to train in that environment. She wanted to join him, but Bai Yi immediately refused. Displaying his usual withdrawn and uncomfortable posture, he preferred to train in a separate room, making it clear, once again, that he was uneasy around women, as if he were afraid of them. Chi-Yin was not pleased with the protagonist's refusal. She wanted to be sure he was truly rejecting her company. Bai Yi bluntly confirmed, once again showing his discomfort around women, as if he had some kind kind of instinctive fear of females. Soon after, the scene shifted to inside the training room. Even though he was used to the warrior profession, Bai Yi was just a novice in the mage class. He needed to learn quickly and become efficient in this new role. Moreover, he had to hide his greatest secret, the ability to acquire multiple professions. If others found out, it could lead to major problems, especially since the school was directly overseen by the Divine Guild, and any suspicious activity would be quickly reported. Becoming a target was not an option. Later, after leaving school, Bai Yi was pushing his bicycle along the street. Suddenly, two classmates called out to him. In his past life, those two boys had been his best friends in high school. They were constant targets of bullies and often walked home together after classes. Those shared moments were some of the only happy memories he had from that stage of life. However, in this new chance, his focus was revenge. Unnecessary social interactions would only delay his goals. So he got on his bike and pedaled away quickly, ignoring the two boys. They were surprised, recalling the pact they had made, the so-called loser's triangle, and felt disheartened that Bai Yi had once again left them behind. Still, Four Eyes noticed that, after awakening, Bai Yi had changed. He now seemed much more confident. However, Bai Yi stopped ahead and waited for the two boys to catch up. When they reached him, he took the chance to tell Four Eyes that he should get his lungs checked when he had the time. Right after that, the protagonist got back on his bike and pedaled away, making it clear that his former friends wouldn't be able to keep up with his new pace in life. One of the boys complained, saying he could have kept up if it weren't for the running drills they had that day. In truth, Bai Yi had a hidden reason for his comment. In his previous life, Four Eyes was suddenly diagnosed with a severe lung disease and had to drop out of school. Not long after, he passed away. Bai Yi simply wanted to give him a warning. Even if they weren't close friends now, he still hoped that in this new timeline, the boy would survive. The story then shifts to the Sacred Realm in the new training grounds for recruits. Dong Yang was resting peacefully, enjoying the sun. He had heard rumors that a new recruit had recently stood out. It was the very same guy who had betrayed Bai Yi in his past life. Next, the story returns to the protagonist's house on Monday night. Bai Yi didn't want his mother to go out alone and promised to come home early to carry the groceries. Even though it was a simple gesture, he wanted to build a more stable and safe environment for her as quickly as possible. The scene then cuts to the awakened prison. Bai Lingsheng was getting his meal in the cafeteria and trying to negotiate with the food server, looking for a way out of his situation. On Tuesday at the school campus, Bai Yi had already gotten used to the commands of the mage class. He realized that the key factors were casting time and precise calculation of elemental power. Meanwhile, his old friend, the one with the bowl-cut hairstyle, was pushing himself to increase his workout reps. By Wednesday, Four Eyes was already showing signs of fatigue from the intense training. That day, Bai Yi ran into the two boys again. They invited him to have dinner with them, but he declined, saying he had to help his mother. The boys didn't like the response much, but Bai Yi advised them to train their archery skills more so they could improve their speed. On Thursday in the school infirmary, Four Eyes was having a medical checkup. The doctor congratulated him for seeking help early. It turned out he had a parasitic tumor in his lungs with accelerated growth. Fortunately, he could schedule surgery soon, and everything would be fine. As he left the appointment, Four Eyes thought about Bai Yi's warning. If he hadn't missed the school's physical exam, he might not have even asked for a lung scan. He truly didn't understand how his classmate had noticed something so specific about his health. While walking down the stairs, Four Eyes overheard three students talking. The topic was Hong Changsheng, who had allegedly cheated to reach a top ranking. Apparently, he had secured the best placement and was ranked first for the final evaluation. The students also mentioned that Changsheng's family owned their own exclusive demon lair, used solely to train members of their private army. Moreover, they said Changsheng was planning to teach Bai Yi a lesson that same day after school. Rumors were that he had even brought weapons, and since it would happen off campus, he seemed ready to do something extreme. That information left Four Eyes completely desperate. He imagined Changsheng might show up with several allies to intimidate Bai Yi alone. However, he also knew that he was just a cowardly support-type student with no offensive abilities. Maybe Bai Yi could handle everything on his own. Still, the fear of Changsheng paralyzed him. His life principle had always been to avoid bad people at all costs. Then, in a moment of impulse, the chains on the armory door were completely shattered. The one responsible was Four Eyes himself, driven by a sudden surge of courage. Even if it meant dying, he believed he had to help Bai Yi. After all, the protagonist had saved his life in some way. With trembling hands but a determined heart, he grabbed an axe and ran. For the first time, he was willing to do something for Bai Yi with conviction. Chi-Yin arrived shortly after and was startled by the unusual scene. She didn't understand why Four Eyes had broken into the armory like that. She wanted answers, but he didn't have time to explain. He simply pointed out that he had to save Bai Yi immediately, and Chi-Yin was shocked. She was surprised by the seriousness of this normally cowardly boy. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Bai Yi, who was pushing his bike along the sidewalk. sidewalk. He stopped for a moment, sensing a familiar presence behind him. Calmly, he stated that he knew Qiangsheng had been following him since they left school and wanted to know what his intentions were. With a sword in hand, Hong Qiangsheng appeared, determined to settle the score for what had happened the previous weekend. Bai Yi was curious to know if he really thought he had a chance. The answer was yes. Qiangsheng was confident, claiming he had trained hard since then in order to defeat him. He then used a skill called backstab, which teleported him behind the enemy and allowed for a sudden attack. Even so, the protagonist reacted effortlessly. He handled the situation so naturally that it left Qiangsheng completely confused. He couldn't understand how Bai Yi's power had become so overwhelming. The protagonist responded firmly, explaining that he wasn't the only one who had evolved. He took the sword from his rival's hands and also drew the one he had taken from his father's safe. In a symbolic gesture, he threw Qiangsheng to the ground and stabbed the blade into the ground before him, as if marking his territory. In that moment, Qiangsheng realized something he had never understood before. After so much effort, training, and countless attempts, even being the same age, he would never be able to surpass the boy standing before him. The weight of that revelation fell like an avalanche. Confused and in shock, Qiangsheng asked what Bai Yi's level was. The protagonist didn't answer directly, but it was clear that he was far ahead. Qiangsheng himself had been doing extra training every day after school and had barely reached level 4. He said he had worked hard, but couldn't understand how his opponent had progressed so much in such a short time. Bai Yi questioned the sincerity of that effort. He asked if Qiangsheng had ever died before. The question carried hidden weight, as the protagonist was speaking both literally and metaphorically. Defeated on the ground, Qiangsheng accepted his death. He was certain Bai Yi was ready to finish him off. However, the protagonist didn't consider Qiangsheng all that annoying. In fact, he found it almost funny how the boy had pursued him over time, almost as if he had a romantic obsession. After all, he hadn't ambushed him, nor brought allies. He came alone. Bai Yi concluded that Qiangsheng only wanted to test his strength against him. But now the other no longer wanted to fight. He'd rather die than continue feeling that humiliation. He had been humiliated by someone who's afraid of women. He was completely shattered. At that moment, Qi Yin and Four Eyes arrived at the scene. They saw Bai Yi on top of Qiangsheng in a rather suspicious position. The scene looked strange, but after observing for a few seconds, they realized nothing else needed to be done. The fight was already over. Still staring at Qiangsheng, Bai Yi made a proposal. He said he had been waiting for him and had a deal to offer. He would reveal a method to become stronger in less time. However, it would come at a cost. Qiangsheng would have to give something in return. The conversation began to take a strange turn, but there seemed to be sincerity in the offer. Then, the scene changed to Friday, May 29th. The day of the evaluation had arrived. An intense week of training had been completed, and the simulated battle was about to begin. The instructor gathered all the students and made it clear that, despite the name, the combat was not just a simulation. They would be sent into a real demon lair where most of the monsters' power was sealed by a special barrier. Even so, the place was dangerous. It was filled with demonic beasts, and everyone needed to act cautiously, respecting their own limits. To ensure the participants' safety, experienced veterans from the high school division had been assigned as guides. The challenge was real, and any mistake could come at a high cost. The students had to form teams of 4 members. Each group would be guided by a veteran, who could take 3 to 4 students into the dungeon. There were 2 options available: F rank or E rank demon lairs. Naturally, the E rank ones were more difficult and were only available to those who truly felt confident in their abilities. The risk was real. If they failed the challenge inside the dungeon, they could lose important academic credits, which would directly impact their final grades for the semester. With that in mind, the dungeon selection process began. The students were instructed to raise their hands if they wanted to challenge an E-rank demon lair. Only a few raised their hands. Among them were Qi Yin and Hong Qiangsheng, who didn't hesitate to show their confidence. However, Qi Yin quickly noticed something strange. Bai Yi remained silent. That immediately caught her attention. She had expected him, so determined in recent days, to choose the more difficult path. The rest of the students, who did not volunteer, would be randomly assigned to groups destined for F-rank demon lairs, which were safer and more accessible. At that moment, Bai Yi stood up and voiced his decision directly to the instructor. He didn't want to join either of the standard groups. With a firm voice, he stated that he wished to challenge the Spiritual Jade Demon Lair, one of the most dangerous dungeons in the school, classified as D rank. His request took everyone by surprise. A silence fell over the room. None of the students had expected anyone to even consider entering a dungeon above the allowed level for that evaluation. All eyes turned to him, stunned. Bai Yi's boldness was anything but ordinary. It shattered all expectations and made it clear that he was following a path completely different from the other. The teacher couldn't understand why Bai Yi had considered such an absurd idea. All the students were worried, and the teacher began to suspect that the boy was just playing with him. After all, no one in their right mind would jump straight into a Class D cave known for its high level of danger. At that moment, Hong Liang appeared, finding the whole thing completely absurd. He explained that Class D demonic caves were extremely dangerous, usually reserved for far more experienced students. It was unusual for high schoolers to even consider such a challenge. Yet Bai Yi remained defiant. Firmly, Bai Yi explained to the principal that at no point did the school manual forbid students from entering Class D or higher caves. The rules of simulated combat clearly stated that each student could choose their own level of challenge. The school's mission was to discover talents for the divine course, and the criteria for that involved courage, strength, responsibility, and natural talent. For this reason, Bai Yi questioned whether the principal was trying to take away his chance to prove his worth. Hong Liang tried to argue that the cave in question required team entry. Even so, Bai Yi didn't care. He wanted to go in alone. The principal, with a serious and threatening tone, stressed that the rules existed to protect the students and that solo entry was strictly forbidden. Suddenly, Qi Yin raised her hand and declared that she too was willing to enter a Class D cave. This caught the principal by surprise. Qi Yin explained that she wanted to achieve the highest score, just like Bai Yi himself, and that was why she was willing to take the challenge. Her attitude left Hong Liang visibly irritated. Qi Yin felt proud to show such courage and believed she was shining, just like Bai Yi. However, the boy made it clear that he refused to accept her presence. He didn't want to work in a group. He wanted to clear the whole cave by himself. This frustrated Qi Yin, who grew upset with the rejection. She wanted to know if he was really rejecting her again, but the teacher tried to calm her down, explaining that Bai Yi's decision held no weight against the school's rules. The principal could hardly believe what was happening. It was one absurdity after another. He found it ironic that the two students who had awakened only a week ago already thought they were ready to face anything. The teacher was also thoughtful. Only those two were willing to take on the challenge, and no one else seemed brave enough to join. Then, to everyone's surprise, another student stepped forward to accompany Bai Yi and Qi Yin. He wore a ruby pendant on his chest and stated that the two were still fragile flowers who needed someone to protect them. His name was Zilling. Zilling's presence reassured the teacher, who clearly trusted him. Qi Yin was surprised to see him, since he was a respected senior and an official member of the definitive school corps. Bai Yi, however, found it strange, as he had never heard of him. Zilling, in turn, upon looking at Bai Yi, thought the boy was nothing more than a chick who didn't yet know his own limits. He believed Bai Yi just wanted to spread his feathers in front of everyone, without considering the true weight of his actions. With the teams finally set, the teacher presented the entrance portal and announced that the simulation test would begin immediately. He explained that inside the caves there would be professional streaming equipment to follow the participants throughout their journey. Everything would be recorded. For this reason, he encouraged the students to give their best, emphasizing that this was a great opportunity to earn a high score. Meanwhile, Bai Yi reflected on the place. The Awakening Academy had been built over an ancient demon cave, which had already been conquered in the past. Both the high school and elementary divisions operated there, and the great main cave had generated smaller branches, ideal for student tests. Most of the dungeons were now controlled and ranked between D and F. Entering one marked the beginning of a simulated combat, and the entire exercise would be broadcast live. That was why Bai Yi knew he had to be careful not to reveal all his trump cards, especially in front of unknown enemies. The Lingyu Demon Cave, in particular, sparked Bai Yi's interest for a specific reason. The scene then shifted inside the test. Zilling, showing confidence, reassured his teammates and said he would guarantee Bai Yi's and Qi Yin's safety, since he already had previous experience in Class D demonic caves. Qi Yin showed curiosity about the strength of the creatures inside. Zilling then explained that the monsters usually ranged between levels 5 and 15. The most powerful ones were sealed, and it was rare for true demonic beasts to appear, especially bosses. Even so, he advised not to underestimate the enemies, because despite the students' strength and speed, in the eyes of the creatures, they were still just novices. As a senior, Zilling even suggested that he would look for weaker monsters for Qi Yin to face safely and earn credits. He made it clear that, as a senior, he would not allow a junior to get hurt. But at that moment, he realized that Bai Yi had already quickened his pace, walking ahead of the group. He tried to warn him, saying that this could scare off the monsters, but Bai Yi was already impatient. With a cold gaze, he ignored the advice and shot back a sharp reply, implying that Zilling talked too much. The senior was shocked by the boy's audacity. Worse still, Bai Yi began to release his energy, demanding that Zilling stay away and remain silent, since he didn't need help. This made the senior tremble with anger, almost giving in to the urge to slap the boy just to make him stop showing off. Even so, the group continued advancing through the cave. Meanwhile, the live broadcast had begun. Several people were already watching the test, including those responsible for supervision on campus. At the definitive core campus, a green-haired boy looked at his phone with an excited smile. He called his captain, wanting to show her the broadcast he thought looked promising. That boy was the vice captain of the campus, curious to watch the performance of one of the juniors who had chosen a Class D dungeon. He was, of course, talking about Bai Yi. The captain, in turn, grew interested and wanted to know what class that boy belonged to. Observing the monsters around him, Bai Yi realized that those creatures were sealed and could only use half of their original strength. For that reason, they were easy to deal with, especially for someone with his abilities. Even so, Chi-Yin remained impressed. Watching Bai Yi face so many enemies at once made her feel far from that level. Even knowing the monsters were weakened, she recognized she was still far from reaching him. However, Bai Yi found such comparisons unnecessary. He believed Chi-Yin should focus on her own growth and stop measuring herself against others. That would only hinder her development. Trying to ease the mood, Chi-Yin smiled faintly and asked why he always spoke so coldly. Then she promised to do her best in that dungeon. Zilling, on the other hand, was annoyed. To him, it was clear that Bai Yi was attracting all the spotlight and overshadowing his presence. Like a shameless beta, he had joined that team only to impress Chi-Yin, and now he found himself completely ignored. Irritated, he approached the two and reminded them that they were in a Class D dungeon. He stressed that the place demanded caution and thought Bai Yi was being far too arrogant. He admitted that the boy's performance was impressive, but pointed out that, as far as he knew, this was his first time in a labyrinth. Moreover, the location had 3 interconnected chambers, which made everything harder to handle and control. Even so, Bai Yi completely ignored the remarks. He looked at Chi-Yin and asked her to handle the monsters approaching from the right, while he would take care of those coming from the left. The blatant disregard made Zilling furious. On the ground, several creatures had already been defeated, and the senior couldn't understand how that boy kept pretending he didn't even exist. Bai Yi stuck to his plan. He told Chi-Yin that the monsters on the right were of a lower level and asked if she could handle them on her own. She hesitated, still not fully confident in herself, which Zilling noticed with disdain. To him, it was clear that the brat had no respect whatsoever for his seniors. In response, Bai Yi explained that the simulated combat was, in the end, an individual skill test. Each person would be evaluated based on their own performance, and he wanted to know if Chi-Yin wasn't interested in earning a good score. The girl, upon hearing that, understood the purpose and replied with determination, promising to give her best. Zilling, watching the scene, felt his anger grow inside. It was as if Bai Yi purposely preferred to do everything the hardest way. And the worst part was that, even so, he kept getting better results than everyone else. Everyone was impressed by the number of monsters he had killed as soon as the test began, since they were Class E monsters. One of them asked what level he was at now, and the report said he was still level 1, but maybe level 3 or even level 4. He added that he had chosen the monsters on the left while sending Chi-Yin to the right. One of the instructors explained that perhaps he had noticed her element and made her pick monsters of the same element, and that he had made logical assignments, despite it being an individual test. The instructor wearing a cap recalled the moment our protagonist had spoken earlier and realized that he truly hadn't been bluffing. Back to Bai Yi, he thought that he had noticed earlier that the beasts of the astral element all came from the right cave, and they weren't just low-level monsters, but also the same element as hers. Chi-Yi was fighting one of the spiders, and she used a wall of vines to wrap around it, piercing it, making it fall dead instantly, earning her 30 experience points. She felt proud of herself, and Bai Yi thought that when mages were at Class E, they possessed a basic, class-specific skill for their profession, and hers was to create a wall of poisonous plants. Bai Yi reflected on her since it was her first time in a labyrinth, yet she remained calm when facing monsters and killed them easily. It was impressive. He thought the Class D monsters would soon be sealed and was certain she would be able to handle the ones in front of her. And at this pace, even in front of the instructors during a live broadcast, he could hide his true strength and still achieve a high score. But he also had to consider that the broadcasting equipment had followed them this far, and he wondered how he would proceed with the next step. Meanwhile, the other group member grew furious, as he had been completely ignored. He aimed his bow and shot in Chi-Yin's direction, but the arrow passed very close to her. He apologized, saying he had been trying to buff her, but she had dodged. Then, a monster emerged from the cave, a 2-headed lion, level 11 Class D, leaving Chi-Yin completely terrified.